Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Limitless edX. Today, we're going to be talking about addressing violence in the classroom, confronting the escalating crisis in education. So, Andrea, the
This is a
stories we can tell.
this is a juicy topic. Well, first, we'll kind of discuss the issue of violence in the classroom right now for parents and families who are listening. It is honestly, I think it's probably the number one the number one issue and problem that is affecting every aspect of education, especially the grassroots of what's going on in the classrooms right now in the school system. It affects every single area of education, from young ones all the way up to teens and beyond, in universities as well. And it's really a problem that we are seeing that has no solutions right now, as it is it's increasing so exponentially. I don't think that they're able to keep up with it. And by they, I mean like school boards, unions, the government. I think they're at a loss for really what to do about the increase of violence in the classroom. So then it weighs on the shoulders of the various administrators, principals, vice principals, and the classroom teachers and the support staff as well in each individual school. But Jeanette, I don't know if you want to go into some personal experiences or touch more on like the issue of violence in the classroom.
Oh, definitely. That was my background. That was my peanut butter and jelly. Um, I worked in the school boards, yes, but I also worked in various institutions with very at risk. I'm talking about kids like teens that were in custody. I'm talking about like kids that were like severely autistic. I have worked with very challenging kids. And when you're a mental health professional, you undergo a certain training, and frontline staff just don't have it. What you have to endure to get that training. Like I trained with police. I trained with trainers in restraints. We worked as a collective. A lot of the issues that they're experiencing in education, like people would look at me and be like, "Why aren't you working miracles?" I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm not God." So, but and a lot of these things were just beyond the parameters of mainstream education, right? Because it is exactly that, mainstream, the people in the middle, right? So the kids that are average, that can toe the line in the center, that's what the system is for. But those that are on like other side of those needs fall through the cracks. And because people in some of these institutions, we used to have sharps locked away. The food, obviously, we would feed them very healthily, but it was one of those things where you had to keep it locked away, because you have budgets, and they they could, kids are snackers. And they could take it too far. But like in these institutional environments, you can structure the environment so that it is more safe for the children. You have the amount of staff to minimize the impact of violence. You had maybe like a room with that was made of foam to support in de-escalation. It is hard to say that that is needed, but sometimes it is needed for the safety of the child itself that it's experiencing the extreme mental health, and for the exterior, for the home and for other kids, you have to maintain that safety thing. And schools are not designed for this. And yeah,
I
you can really get hurt. They have the strength of 10 men sometimes. It's crazy.
Definitely. Oh my goodness. We'll have to go more into that. But before we move on, I just want to highlight the fact that you had specialized training. And I think families and parents of children in the school system don't often recognize how expensive that training is. So very, very few get it. So even within the school board that I used to teach in, they offer like BMS training, maybe twice a year, and it was very expensive. And it does also not only is it the course expensive, then the trainer's expensive. So it's costing you money to train every single person, but it also takes time. So if they have to be out of the schools for 2 or 3 days for training intensively, that also is costing money for their replacement. So I think honestly, the bottom line is why don't we have the proper resources or solutions for this? Is because it's expensive.
It is expensive, and right now a lot of those spec ed teachers are being pulled from their classrooms. They are put into like regular to fill, staffing shortages. But the problem is the kids need consistency. And
Definitely.
right now it's like a very parents versus educators kind of thing. Like, oh, it's your fault, it's your fault. But the reality of it is parents are not trained in mental health. They don't know what to do. If you have a child that has autism and you've never dealt with it before, you don't know what to do. Um,
Mhm.
I really love this movement that's come about parent training, parent coaching. We have quite a few actually. We have Roots and Wings Childhood, CC Sorensen Coaching, Spectrum of Light Services, and she deals with a lot of autism support. And I do encourage parents to follow and educators as well to kind of support them in filling those gaps and, seeing their content and even reaching out for some services because you're not supposed to just know everything. Nobody knows everything. You're always kind of get these new behaviors thrown at you, even when you have regular kids that are more mainstream, but mental health impacts everyone.
I love that there are solutions rising up, and definitely parent coaching is one of them. I think if you're okay, we'll go back into the experiences because your experiences at a level of an institution would be very different than what people are seeing day to day in the classrooms. And I think oftentimes when I'm speaking to friends in education, we can all share our experiences, and very commonly they're similar in the escalating level of violence that we see, but more so day to day, you're not going to see the average Joe who comments on Facebook or Instagram have a clue what goes on inside the classroom. That's what a lot of parents or a lot of teachers are trying to get across to parents because it's parents who can make the difference in really advocating for their own child's safety because the teacher could advocate for the safety of the children in their classroom, but it doesn't get very far. So, in terms of discussing the problem of what we see, it's mind blowing. I don't think parents often realize. So, even at the very youngest level of JK, you can see children who are completely out of control. They often are not diagnosed at that age and they throw things. They can throw tables, they can throw chairs, they can throw desks. I had I've had the experience many, many times as a classroom teacher where in grade 1 and 2, I had to evacuate the classroom because that was the solution that we had. So if we had a student who was very, very volatile and would snap several times a day, it wasn't just that he would scream or try to hit somebody, it would that he would pick up the largest piece of furniture that he could and throw it. So your only choice as a classroom teacher in that instance is to buzz the office for help and evacuate your classroom. So that's what I think you hear most from teachers right now in the classrooms on the front lines is there are no solutions for when you do have a violent student. And many times the support staff can do all they can, but like you said, they're not trained. We don't have the capacity to provide a lot of help that would be needed in terms of like collaborating with the professionals involved, like doctors and the support team. The specialized teams at the board office, they're working in like 180 different schools, so they're not always available. And not to mention the fact that a lot of I found in my experience, the spec ed coordinators would observe and give you recommendations, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're applying that day to day and you're having to evacuate your classroom 3 or 4 times, it's huge. We had special needs students at the school that I taught with that would thrive on going for walks, but then they would throw bodily fluids in through other classroom doors as they're walking by or at other people, which is, I mean, it's a biohazard. So I don't think people realize the scope. We had one, and it was very hush hush, but now that I'm not on the board, I can talk about it. We had a spec ed coordinator have her face fractured because one of the students that she was observing threw something and it hit her face. And that's always kept so hush hush, but teachers and students alike are actually being very harmed.
And I just saw something on social media recently. I believe it was in the US, but it still applies and happens here, regardless. Um,
Mhm.
but a VP, so even, when teachers call administrators, they're also part of the frontline staffing
Yeah.
and they're in the same position as they are. They're not fully trained in mental health, maybe a little bit more training. From a leadership lens, but but the frontline lens is a little bit different, like the ones that have that more intense training. And so one of the VPs went in to support the teacher and was there with another administrator. And one of the kids threw something, like after throwing a number of furniture, but they threw a piece of wood and it pulled her eye out of her eye socket. And so now she is blind out of one eye. And so, like, the severity of the consequences, it's very serious. It's like, and there's various degrees. People really need to start looking at specific communities, what their needs are in terms of mental health, and providing supports and money.
Yeah.
You need to throw money at this. It's not like, but the problem is the greed at the top is just they want to get paid all this money. Quite frankly, the people on the front line that are willing to address this should be getting paid that kind of money.
They
Um,
should.
because it's like there is a risk to yourself. Think about like police, right? Like you're going out there is a risk of harm, like a serious harm to you, and you should be paid very well, and you should have the training in place to support that. Because
Definitely.
like even when I worked in institutions, we couldn't always address the violence. We sometimes had to get the police involved and bring them and have them taken away so that they could be take it to the next level. But in
Yeah.
terms of like inside the school system and the grassroots there's a lot of kids that they want to help. They've had some, maybe some kids needed some extra supports, but they didn't have the money to
Yeah.
address it. But the spirit was there. And I really think if people just put people ahead of profits, like obviously I understand that, the business always it's part of the equation, but at the same time, like it's just you do
It,
need to put the people ahead of that. Like these
it
are
needs a complete overhaul. That's what we're seeing now is the level of corruption and greed at the teachers unions levels and at the school board levels, regardless of intentions. I mean, there are some very high upper admin that I'm sure have like really kind, well thought out intentions. It's just when you're working in a system designed to not be helpful, it corruption can run amok, right? When you have students, not students, but EAs and teachers wearing Kevlar so they can't be bitten through the skin, it's something has to happen. It was never like that 20 years ago. And I know that I'm not idealizing what education was like 20 years ago. It just leads to the example of how quickly it has escalated. And there are no solutions. And not to mention, we haven't even touched on bullying or weapons that are brought into the classroom as well.
oh, people have no idea. I see like posts about going after legal gun owners. I'm like, mm. I've worked with gangs. I've worked in like high school. People have no idea how easy it is to get an illegal weapons. And these are young kids that are getting access to it. You need, like, for example, we started to see improvement in high school. So I've worked with like gangs inside the schools, and we started doing a lot of programs to rebuild relationships. So we had like cops in basketball, we had cops in computers. Like I brought in the police, like even when we did a cultural event, we would just invite them to come and enjoy some of the little delicious things that the parents and kids had made. But just like that opportunity of, and some of the kids would come up to me and be like, "Yo, miss, these guys are like nice guys." I'm like, "Oh yeah, well, cops are people." I'm like, there's good and bad everywhere. But it's kind of, opening the gate to connection. Um,
Definitely.
and those cops were like, they were young, cool, a lot of them, young, cool guys that just wanted to be involved. And those are the kind of like you need those kinds of programs. We also had Breaking the Cycle, where it was they had given them funding and then taken it away. And they had supported so many young people from exiting the gang community.
Mhm.
And they were just, they gave them pennies and then would take it away. And these are people working from the heart. We have to look at where we're investing. And if it's like what the community's problem is, that's where the money needs to go. There
Mhm.
are people that came from this community that broke those cycles that want to reinvest and rebuild in within their communities, and they should be given the chance to do it.
I think that that's a really good point. Oftentimes, I think too, parents feel that these issues only occur in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, and they don't. And that's a really point that we wanted to hit home right now is that it doesn't matter of the demographics of the neighborhood. You could find in the most affluent neighborhoods, kids are still bringing weapons to school, they're still bringing drugs to school, there's still widespread violence, and almost the bullying becomes more insidious because you don't overtly see it at times. And I think it's a huge thing and it's being covered up. And
Yes.
it's being covered up because there are direct liability issues with the school board. There was, yeah, horrific instances that I could talk about, even just in the London, Ontario system, where things were being covered up, and it was very apparent that parents weren't being told the truth. So it's great that we focus on relationships, but also even just relationships with our kids and having them speak freely. And that was the whole goal of this topic of our podcast today, is just really coming up with some solutions together and how alternative education really eliminates a lot of the concern and the threat of what's going on inside the school system right now, because it's only getting worse.
For sure. And I think the common themes, and you're right, it's one of those, like there are themes, high economic or low economic. So, for example, high economic, yes, the drugs are more expensive, but it's still a problem, right?
Mhm.
It's one of those, so they might have more money, but they have parents that are still absent because of, they're really like involved in their work. And I'm not discounting, yes, but you need some kind of substitute. You need presence. You need adult positive role modeling in even in the low. So like the low economic, they're just trying to survive for basic needs. But then high, you still have that absent parent, but you still across the board, you need positive role models, both female and male, to support these kids in their life's journey. And even adults need each other. You need community. It can't just be, people need to really start reevaluating what their end goals, like what do you want? Do you want your children to be able to be self-sufficient? What is
Absolutely.
that going to take? What
I
do you
think
need to, and you can't move forward on some of the basic things if you don't have their behavior under wraps. And
absolutely.
violence is a hard limit. I like it has to be the ultimate limit because people will not help them if they are violent.
Yeah.
Your kids, like that has to be the number one thing addressed, I think.
That's a really good point with the relationships aspect too, because that reflects back to what we talked about in the earlier episodes of our podcast, about how we left the school system and how those relationships, I'm going to be bluntly honest, I don't think are there anymore. When it became so apparent and obvious in 2020 and 2021, where children's mental health was not recognized as a major consideration to all the mandates going on, and when they remember when they built the wooden blocks around basketball nets, and like they actually like had people come out and build things so kids couldn't play on the playground. Nonsense. And then that is why we're seeing such a rise in mental health. But in terms of finding relationships that are trustworthy, where they feel safe, there's not a lot of them out there anymore. I think people are checked out. I think teachers are checked out. I know a lot of previous friends and colleagues that I had really found the threat of their death over COVID much more important than the 20 or 25 or 30 little ones that they had in their classroom. And parents, I feel, could see the hypocrisy in a lot of things, but they don't act on it. And I'm having difficulty connecting how they don't see that if you keep your child in the school system, that's going to happen again. And it's going to be sooner than later. And you have to understand that if you're not establishing trust and connection in your relationship with your children, they don't have a lot of outlets right now to go to in the community and in the school system as a whole. I know that sounds a little bit pessimistic, but I truly know of a lot of people who reach out to me and they're like, Andrea, I love what you're saying, and can you say this? And they give me stories of what's happening in their school, but they don't speak out themselves. So it becomes one of those aspects of if you're not standing up yourself, then why are you in education? That's my opinion.
Well, a lot of them feel stuck. And I remember when I was in a classroom, it was a violent classroom. I was pregnant at the time.
Mhm.
And they had tried to take away my only support. Um, and things were hard during my pregnancy. And they were like, oh, well, they're leaving and we can't have anybody. We don't have the budget. I was like, oh, you must think I'm new here. No. You are bringing someone in or you're teaching the classroom. I told administrator, I'm like, here's the number of some staffing companies, and I can contact them for you if need be, but you get somebody in there or I'm leaving, and they like me. So, and I had somebody in within the next week. You have to advocate. You have no idea how important you are. Do you honestly think administrators
Yeah.
can cover everyone on the front line? No, no, no. If you are actually standing your ground and saying, and some people would be like, I can't believe you talk to them that way. I'm like, they're human beings too, and you have to set boundaries. I think that should be, it's okay to have boundaries and say, like, no, I can't accept this. This is not sustainable. Enough. This is
Yeah.
what, like, educators pay twice. You pay with your taxes for this ridiculous system, and you pay board costs out of your paycheck. Pay attention to those acronyms that you pay because you pay the board to work there. They take a portion of your paycheck. So stand your ground. This is the system that you are paying for. Say something. You have to, or else you won't, because kids don't know how to advocate. Families just feel like they need to accept whatever, and encourage parents to advocate. I know that.
Absolutely. There was a case where there was a child who was very, very, very disturbed. And obviously, when we talk about students that are like this, I would say, I don't know the exact percentage, but it would be very, very high that they are also abused at home. So they are coming from a childhood of trauma and a childhood where they don't see communication valued and where relationship building is non-existent and they don't have the tools or the solutions to advocate for themselves as children, and then they come to school and they release their violence on the classroom as well. But there was a situation where, and it was the same student, oh my goodness, in JK, he was obviously being sexually abused at home, and he was doing this to children in his classroom in JK in the bathrooms. And when there are 30, 33 kids in the classroom, I'm going to be very honest, it's hard to monitor every single one. So that happened. And then 6 years later, the same student brings a knife to school in his backpack by grade 5. And I'm going to say that nothing was done. The teacher was beside herself, but there aren't a lot of parents who speak up. And not only that, but not a lot of the kids even know. So they don't often go home and say, hey, guess what happened in school today? But every parent usually knows about a student that is extra violent in the classroom because that is the number one thing teachers often hear from friends who are non-teachers. They'll bounce ideas off you and they'll talk about what do you do in this case? And I think oftentimes, like you said, parents don't realize how important their voice is. Educators don't realize how important their voice is. Nobody's using their voice. And we have systems in place, like the unions that are supposed to be our voice, and their voice to advocate for teachers who are experiencing grave violence in the classroom is they know nothing is done. So their solution is take a mental health leave, which, by the way, happy November, we are about to see a lot of. So if your child's teacher suddenly goes on leave, it's because they get paid time off until the end of the year.
You want to hear something crazy I did once?
Oh, what?
So I had this older kid who was like he was violent. He was like punching people in the face. It was really bad. Grade 6. And so I was and I remember they were trying to like not give supports and whatever. So I got so frustrated that I went into the class he was in and I told all the kids, I said, "You are going home. You are telling your parents what is happening in this classroom. You are telling them to call the principal. You are telling them to call head office and say that this kid needs help. You deserve help and something needs to be done. Go home and tell your parents everything." And you know what? It worked. We got like extended contracts. We got the parent voices, but a lot of the parents also don't know maybe or hear like an
Yeah.
off story. But they don't know.
They
Just
don't want to rock the boat either. A lot of parents are like, oh, I don't want to appear like I'm the one who's speaking out. And then they
but if
get
they
judged
do it all
as,
together, it makes
yeah,
a difference, right?
absolutely. Well, it's like we saw during the last few years as well. People are afraid to speak out. And then with the censorship right now, it just goes to show you how powerful your voice is. And if we do speak out about it and call it out for what it is and say, this is unacceptable, kids aren't safe right now in this situation, then there's a lot to go from with that. However, I still firmly believe the solution would be to withdraw them from the school system because as things heat up in society right now, and as we see things getting more violent, I think there's going to be a lot of riots this month of November. I think there's going to be escalating violence, and you already see it. I already see people completely checked out and just really not behaving like they normally behave. So we knew that was coming, but I think the solution would be to remove your children from that situation. In alternative education solutions, situations in all different types. Could it be a micro school or a learning pod or just one-on-one with yourself or co-ops? There's a lot more control and flexibility that parents have with the students that their children are exposed to.
Yeah, I'm really excited because we're on a downward spiral, and anybody who's in the system that is good, they are just the duct tape and chewing gum, but they are
Mhm.
going to, it's not sustainable. Things are going to fall apart. I do think the money needs to go in the hands of the parents because if you have, like, for example, if you have a group of parents that are all their kids have their special needs, we have schools and programs that are willing to expand, take care of everything if the money is there. So
Absolutely.
once they get the choice, we can hit the ground running, putting things into place and start, you know, paying people properly, coming together, putting the money where it needs to. And it's very specific because once you have a group, you can build that foundation and you can only do that with consistency. And then as a kid's behavior improves, they can go more into like maybe a mainstream scenario. But if you don't build that foundation with people that have the experience in mental health, things will just yeah, it's just going to deteriorate, and we want to minimize how horrible it is. Oh, that's a nervous laugh. Sometimes I
Yeah.
laugh when I'm nervous, but it's just like it just seems so far-fetched that people could actually allow it to get to that point. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
What do you
agree.
think?
We are seeing that a lot more too in the United States, Jeanette, with funding being placed more so in the parents' hands. And I think uh, anyone who's listening to our podcast is probably like-minded in that they would be able to spend their tax dollars a lot better than the school boards or than the government. So, not that we're bashing everything and everyone in those institutions, but if you had the $14,000 and change for your student, and that's not including if your child is special needs, if you're able to spend that yourself on maybe private schooling or a micro school or a learning pod that you really like, or different behavior therapies, or homeschool curriculum, or a private teacher, or tutoring that you wanted to supplement, I think it would go a lot further in your own child's mental health than exposing them consistently to the deterioration of the classroom right now.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. And quite frankly, I think people should be able to pursue an education that is aligned with their values. Whether you agree with them or not, at this point, that's moot.
Mhm.
Because like I've worked in religiously specific environments. Myself, I worked in the Catholic school board, but I have worked in like learning environments that were specific like to the Jewish community or worked with like different religious, and we got along fine. Like, but they should have the values and skill sets, and those that are a part of that community respect those values and um, what they want to instill or their vision. Um, I think even if we don't completely agree, like some people are redesigning education out of like from a fear-based kind of collective, and
Mhm.
some people are approaching it more from like a freedom centered, right? But at this point, we just have to see where proof will be in the pudding, where the money is put, and we will see because when you support local, you will what works will tend to go to the top.
Absolutely.
And then
And
the best of the best we can support even further and expand on what works the best.
we'll have to touch on it in another episode as well because we're getting close to our time frame, but we'll need to discuss how like that's exposing children to trauma as well. So trauma in childhood changes their brain. So every time a child is exposed to violence in the school system, it's changing their brain. So it's not like it is minimized. I am so sick of the word resilient. Kids are resilient. Kids are resilient, yes, in very short term circumstances where it's not prolonged over years. They're not meant to thrive in these types of environments. And then that would be our point, is that once you have the flexibility to determine your own child's education route, you can do so much more, and they do thrive and they can retain so much more information, and you can focus on their gifts and their interests and their individualized learning, because we know the school system is a catch-all to meet the ones at the lowest end of the spectrum who need the most help. And anyone above that is really not getting the one-on-one help that they need, or the teaching, or the guidance, or the inspiration.
It's true. Like I agree with you. Resilience is, yes, kids are resilient, but like at what point I've seen kids that were locked in cages, and it impacted them for a lifetime. They are healing from that trauma. You can't just flip a switch and you're healed. It is ongoing healing that they have to do for the rest of their life, and it imprints on your psyche, and it gets to a point like, where are we going to draw the line?
Absolutely. I always go back to that quote, and I don't have it in front of me, but just in terms of, we can see a lot about how society is by the way they treat their most vulnerable. So they're disabled, they're needy, they're special needs, and they're kids. And how are we treating our children right now is deplorable. How we have for the past 4 years, and how so many people got on their soapbox and said kids are resilient, they're fine. And the alarm bell was sounding 3 years ago, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
And the fact that young children had suicide ideation was not an alarm bell that more people cared about, is really sad, heartbreaking. But there are solutions. So we just want to highlight what's going on, and there are solutions to it.
And advocate for people need to just advocate, get the funds. The frontline workers, you know what? A lot of people are concerned about transitioning, but quite frankly, there's a lot of management that isn't very useful.
Mhm.
Sorry, not sorry, but it's true. The front line will always have a position. And quite
Absolutely.
frankly, some of those people in management positions, maybe it's time that you join the front line and see the reality of the situation and come support all those people. You can't
They
just,
never will.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry, you're very optimistic, but they're not going to.
No, no, but it's one of those things that the people that are adaptable, like for example, I could be a leader, but I can also be whatever needs to be done. So
Mhm.
like having, when you have your own business, you are the marketer, you are the custodian, you will fill whatever gap needs to be filled to ensure your success. And I think we need more of that mentality because it's you just but something's going to give,
Yeah.
whatever. But if we have choice, there is so much value in that. And I know it's going to be a hard transition. It'll be easier for the US because they've already had like, privatized um like health and privatized, and we've always had privatized education too, but it hasn't been amplified to this
Hmm.
degree. And so it's always been thought of like, oh, private is, that 40,000 a year, top school, and they haven't been seen as like I don't want to say threat, but you know,
Yeah.
any change, I guess, could be seen as a threat.
It's coming, I think, but we just really want to emphasize that parents do have solutions. Your voice is absolutely the number one. If you are still a parent with your child in the system, definitely use your voice, but start planning on your exit route because definitely November 2024, I think we're about to see some spiciness all over the globe in terms of unrest. And I just choose to not have my children in that.
Yeah. And that was a big thing for me too, because, my youngest with his self-regulation working, and we're developing such a great foundation for him. So I know he'll be ready for a more mainstream environment soon enough, which I'm really excited about. But you have to put in your time. You have to dedicate regardless of, they're children. They deserve the best. And I think
I
once
do.
people realize that, it might be hard, the transition might be hard a little bit, but once you get to that beautiful place, you can really, um, I don't know, like you get this, you can,
Absolutely. Just be willing to step out of your comfort zone because on the other side is where we see um, thriving and growth and just like things we can't even imagine. So it's just awesome when we are given the chance to step outside of that. It's just the initial transition is uncomfortable, but we're going to witness a lot of people being uncomfortable. So unfortunately, that's how we have to get to the place where we are willing to change because I think we're hardwired biologically to go with comfort and what feels safe, right?
that's so true. I couldn't have said it better myself. But I guess we all have to. I think you had mentioned before, it's almost because we had endured the transition earlier in the last few years, it's a lot easier for us to, be adaptable to change. But those that have kind of went under the wire for so long to embrace it at this point might be, but know that regardless where you're at in your journey, there are supports available to you and to just reach out to people, ask questions. Um,
Yeah. There's a lot of people who know what's up about the system and they can give you accurate, honest, and very applicable guidance for each individual situation. So that would be my advice to everyone or guidance. Just explore and get to know people outside of the system that can help as well, or just start exploring what you might do yourself and uh, your journey of your child's education as well. What would you like to see different? And we're always open and willing to comments or questions if you have any. I think we'll probably wrap up here, Jeanette. We're getting towards the end of our time. We went a little bit over today, but we really appreciate everyone listening. And we have so many more exciting topics coming up on Limitless EdX.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.